Poor girl thought the millionaire CEO was a scammer, but he fell for her honesty and kindness. It wasn't the coffee that changed her life. It was the sound of her backpack slamming into a stranger's back. The kind of sound that stops time. He thought he was a scammer. Someone preying on old women in an airport. So she hit him with everything she had. And when he turned around, with blood on his lip and a business card in his hand, he realized she hadn't attacked a thief. She'd just assaulted a millionaire. And somehow, that was the beginning of the only love story he would ever truly believe in. The fluorescent lights of the airport buzzed like they had something to say, but no one was listening. Travelers shuffled past each other in silence, faces buried in phones, shoulders hunched beneath backpacks, hearts beating to separate desks. The Louisa Morris moved through them like someone underwater. The final rejection letter from a temp agency sat unread in her inbox. Not that it needed reading. She already knew what it would say. "We appreciate your time. Unfortunately," her sneakers were wearing thin. Her dignity had worn out hours ago. She'd gone through 3 interviews that week, each more humiliating than the last, and still hadn't found a way to make the next month's rent. She sniffed once and wiped her nose on her sleeve, pretending it was the cold air, not the ache behind her eyes. Her backpack thudded against her hip, heavier than it looked. It carried everything she still owned that mattered. Resumes, charger cords, mints, and her mother's old driver's license tucked into the front pouch. For luck. It hadn't helped. She passed a chocolate shop and on impulse spent her last $5 on a small dark chocolate bar she could barely taste. The automated doors ahead whispered open, calling her back to the bus station outside, to the grayness of another city that had no place for her. But then, she saw it. An elderly woman, maybe mid-70s, struggling with a heavy roller bag and a purse that looked more like a bowling ball in disguise. She was trying to hold it all together, arms trembling, expression calm but slipping. And behind him, man, light blue dress shirt, sunglasses, too polished for that setting. Louisa's chest clenched. He leaned toward the older woman, reaching for her bag. Instinct moved faster than reason. "Hey," she yelled. Her backpack swung off her shoulder with a strength that surprised even her. It hit him square in the back. "Security," Louisa shouted. "Someone call security." He was about to rob her. The woman froze, cookies falling from her purse and skittering across the tiled floor like confused beetles. "Rob?" She blinked, confused. "He was helping me." Lisa's stomach dropped. The man turned slowly, lifting his sunglasses with the kind of deliberate slowness reserved for lawyers and action heroes. His eyes were sharp blue, not angry, just tired. "You thought I was robbing her?" he asked. He crossed her arms, defensive. "You looked suspicious." He raised an eyebrow. "Because I, wore sunglasses inside?" "Exactly," she snapped. "People with stable migraines," he muttered, brushing dust off his blazer. "Go to you talk, you're going a little overboard. And don't you think you should avoid sneaking up on defenseless women?" "Defenses? She just offered me her self-defense cane." The older woman watched them now like she was front row at a live sitcom. "I could make you both some coffee if you'd like to argue over a cup." The man sighed and pulled something from his blazer pocket. A business card. Belinda, CEO, Miller Enterprises, not a thief. But Louisa took the card, her fingers trembling. The gold edge glinted. "Looks too fancy to be fake," she muttered, still not convinced. "I got hit with a backpack. I'm the victim here." "He was sneaking. You have impulse control issues. You have scammer vibes." He laughed, a short, dry chuckle. "Do you attack many people on instinct?" "Only the charming ones with criminal potential." He paused. "So, you think I'm charming?" He opened her mouth, closed it. He tucked the card against his palm. "Look me up. Google me." Then he gave a small, almost respectful nod and walked off into the terminal crowd, sunglasses back in place like none of it had happened. Louisa stood there, chocolate bar in one hand, business card in the other, heart pounding. What just happened? The next morning she sat in a coffee shop near the Denver bus depot, nursing a burnt slice of toast and pretending the lukewarm coffee wasn't brewed during the Bush administration. She didn't sleep. Her feet ached. Her bank account had $7.41 left. The seat across from her scraped loudly as someone sat down. "I hope your coffee's better today," the voice said. Her head jerked up. Gillen Miller, same blazer, sunglasses hanging from his shirt collar, that same irritating half-smile. "Are you stalking me?" she asked. "Denver has limited options for breakfast. You like burnt toast, apparently." He stared at him. "Because you swung a backpack at me and called me a criminal, and that was the most fun I've had all week." He blinked. He set down a small tray. Coffee, a croissant. And also, he added, "I need a secretary." Chapter 1. The Girl with the Backpack. Louisa stared at the tray like it might explode. "Let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You're offering me coffee, a pastry, and a job." Gillen leaned back, folding his hands behind his head like this was just another Wednesday. "Well, not necessarily in that order. You know nothing about me," she pointed out. "I know you're willing to go to physical extremes to protect a stranger," he replied. "You also know I jump to conclusions, and apparently have violent reflexes, which makes you perfect for the job I have in mind." Louisa narrowed her eye. He added almost as an afterthought, "It's a temporary assistant position, supporting a humanitarian project I'm funding out in the mountains. 2 weeks, rural town, housing included, not glamorous but real work." He blinked. "You're serious?" Gillen sipped his coffee. "Dead." A middle-aged woman named Angela with a notepad and a smirk walked by and Louisa cracked a reluctant smile. She picked up the croissant and took a small bite. It tasted better than any job interview she'd ever had. They sat in awkward silence for a few beats. Louisa watched Dylan carefully, trying to reconcile the cool, composed CEO with the man who had just willingly returned to the scene of his public backpacking. "With me?" she finally asked. "Seriously, you could hire someone with an MBA and a Pinterest planner." "Probably," he said. "But I don't need another yes woman. I need someone who won't be afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Someone who gives a damn, even when they don't have to." She looked down at her hands. They were trembling again. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Dillett replied. "Just a contract, a suitcase, and a seat next to me on a flight that leaves in 3 days." He let out a breath. "You don't even know if—" "You can," he said. "You're the kind of person who figures things out." He squinted. "You read all that from one backpack swing?" "No," he said. "From the fact that you looked me in the eye after—" That afternoon, Louisa Googled him. And there he was, clean-cut in corporate headshots. Headlines like "Denver's youngest CEO funds clinics across the Midwest," and "Reclusive billionaire quietly supports dozens of rural towns." She sat in the library for an hour scrolling through interviews and press releases, each one more confusing than the last. The man she saw online was sharp, strategic, distant. The man who bought her coffee and offered her a job? Still sharp, but maybe not as cold as he wanted people to believe. That night she dreamed of passports she didn't own, towns she'd never heard of, and a crooked half-smile under flickering airport lights. By morning she had made up her mind. 2 days later she stood in the airport terminal again, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her hair tied in a messy bun, her stomach doing flips. He was already there by the window, blazer slung over one shoulder, holding 2 boarding passes and a cup of black coffee. "You came," he said, smiling as if he'd never doubted it. She handed him a beat-up notebook. "Here, so you can keep track of all the mistakes I'm going to make." He took it and flipped to the first page where she had scribbled in thick pen, "Mistake 1, accepting a job from a man I assaulted with a Jazzport." He laughed. "You're not a mistake," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "You're the first right thing in a long time." The flight was mild, the turbulence mild, the silences comfortable. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it was in quiet exchanges. About how she used to love science as a kid. About how he used to sneak out of board meetings to read letters from his grandfather. About how sometimes the best decisions were the ones that didn't make sense on paper. He asked if she liked mountains. She said she liked anything that didn't ask her to prove her worth. He nodded like he understood that far too well. By the time they landed in Gunnison, Colorado, the sky had turned a soft shade of rose. The town was quiet, dirt roads, wide skies, and a school still under construction in the distance. Louisa stepped off the plane and stared at the mountains. "You weren't kidding," she said. Dylan looked at her sideways. "About what?" "About it not being glamorous." "You'd done..." She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Not, just got wondering what the hell I've gotten myself into." He grinned. The beginning of something. That evening they arrived at the house where the project staff lived. It was modest, 2 stories, porch swing, the smell of wood and something cooking in the kitchen. Louisa set her backpack down in her assigned room and stared out the window for a long time. He didn't know why her chest felt tight. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the feeling of standing in a place that hadn't yet decided who you were going to be. Later, she walked down the stairs and found Dylan outside. He was sitting on the porch steps, sleeves rolled up, watching the stars peek out one by one. He sat beside him without a word. After a long pause, he said quietly, "When I was a kid, my older brother died in a place like this. An accident. We were on a trip with my grandfather. There was no medicine, no help." Louisa looked at him, startled by the honesty. "I'm sorry." He nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "I think that's why I fund these places. I don't talk about it much, but it's always there, right under the surface." They sat in silence, the kind that made your heart beat slow. Louisa leaned slightly against his shoulder. Not fully, just enough. "You're not alone in this," she said. Dylan turned his head, just enough to meet her eyes. "You either..." Chapter 2. Something about small tops. The sun rose earlier than Louisa was used to. Or maybe it wasn't the sun, it was the rooster. She groaned into her pillow as it crowed somewhere near the portfolio. It rolled over, expecting the creak of her bedroom door to be followed by a rush of Denver traffic. Instead, all she heard was the wind through cottonwood trees and the smell of wood smoke drifting in. This isn't real, she thought. But it was. She was here, in a 2-story house at the edge of a town without a single Starbucks. She was here because a stranger offered her a job after she hit him with a backpack. She was here because something about Dylan Miller didn't feel like the end of her rope, but the beginning of something else. He found the kitchen by smell: toast, overboiled coffee, and some kind of herbal tea. Monsieur Celia Hawthorne stood at the counter in a faded red bandana, chopping mint with the precision of a surgeon. She glanced up, clocking Louisa's bedhead and fuzzy socks. "Morning, city girl. Welcome to your first full day of not running." Louisa blinked. "Excuse me?" Celia smiled. "Takes one to know one." He slid a mug across the counter. "Peppermint. Helps with nerves." "I'm not nervous." "Your voice is shaking." Louisa took the tea and said nothing. Outside the window, Dylan stood by a truck talking to a group of volunteers. He wore jeans, boots, and a soft blue t-shirt that didn't belong on a cover of Forbes. He looked different here, looser, warmer, but his eyes still scanned like he expected the ground to break beneath him at any moment. Later that morning, Louisa joined Mrs. Celia for a walk through the fields. "We grow herbs for the new clinic," Celia explained, pointing out plants as they went. "This one's good for sleep, that one for anxiety. This one helps with fevers, though it won't fix heartbreak, I checked." Louisa smiled despite herself. They were halfway through the rows when Celia paused and turned toward her. "You like him?" Louisa froze. "Who?" Celia raised a brow. Louisa exhaled. "But you want to." It wasn't a question. "I think..." Louisa hesitated. "I want to trust him, but I don't know how." Celia nodded, touching a cluster of lavender. Dylan's like this plant. Looks steady, but he needs careful hands and the right soil, otherwise he withers. Are you comparing him to a flower? No, for good. After lunch, Louisa sat on the porch watching two kids race past with paper kites and laughter that felt like something from her own forgotten childhood. She missed her mom, missed being 16 with pizza-stained notebooks and songs that felt like they were written just for her. You okay? Dylan's voice came from the porch swing. She shrugged, trying to figure out what I'm doing here. I haven't done anything yet. He gestured toward the field where Celia was now laughing with a group of kids. Wisco smiled at Maurice. So you arrived. Louisa leaned her head back. I don't know if I belong here. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, neither do I. That night she couldn't sleep. The walls creaked like they were remembering something. So she walked quietly down the stairs and found him outside again, on the same steps, the moonlight softening the lines around his mouth. Do you always sit out here? She asked. Only when I can't breathe. He sat beside him. Panic attacks? Memories. Louisa nodded. He didn't say more, and she didn't ask. Instead, she handed him a single cookie she'd found in the kitchen. He took it like it meant something more than it was. The next afternoon, Louisa was sent to help sort medical supplies. It was boring work, checking expiration dates, stacking boxes, but something about the rhythm grounded her. At one point, a boy, 9 years old, with big eyes and missing front teeth, peeked in through the open door. Are you the girl who hit the boss? Louisa blinked. What? He grinned. Oscar said you hit Mr. Dillon at the airport, with a backpack. Where would you hit it at? Everybody's talking about it. He sighed. Well, that's not entirely wrong. The kid giggled. Cool. He found himself laughing too. What's your name? Micah. Want to see the best hiding place in the clinic? He followed him because there was something about kids that didn't ask you who you were before deciding if you mattered. Later that day, Dylan found her on the steps again. Busy day, he asked. Learned how to organize gauze and got recruited into a 9-year-old's underground hospital hideout network. He chuckled. Sounds about right. He glanced at him. Do you ever take a day off? Dylan shook his head. When you grow up believing failure has a body count, rest doesn't feel earned. Louisa looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see a CEO. He saw a boy who once watched someone die and decided he had to save everyone to make up for it. That night a thunderstorm rolled in. The power flickered, the air buzzed. Louisa lay awake listening to the rain beat against the tin roof. And in the silence between lightning strikes she realized he hadn't thought about leaving once all day. Not even once. At Chapter 3, The Girl Who Stayed. I hated her. That's what she told herself as her ankle twisted on the hidden one beneath the herbs. One second she was laughing with Celia about how some of the plants smelled like old soap, and the next she was halfway on the ground, the world flashing white-hot behind her eyes. I'm fine, she lied. You're not, Dylan said from behind her. He was already crouched beside her before she could argue, brushing her tangled hair out of her face with the gentlest touch she wasn't prepared for. His fingers were rough, his voice calm. It made the pain feel worse somehow, not physically, emotionally. He looked at her ankle, then at her. It's swollen, not broken. Great, I'll walk it off. You're not walking anywhere. Udank. He didn't wait. In one movement he slid his arms under her knees and back, lifted her like she weighed nothing, and started walking toward the house. She could have protested. She should have. But she didn't. Because something about being carried like that, like she mattered, like her pain. She rested her head lightly against his chest. It was the first time in years she let someone carry her weight, literally and otherwise. He set her down on the old couch in the living room. No dramaticness, no jokes. Just a folded towel under her ankle and a cold compress made from a bucket of water and clean rags. You're oddly good at this, she said, watching him wrap the cloth with surprising care. I used to think I'd be a doctor." He blinked. "Really?" He nodded. "Before business school. Before the money. Before everything that made me feel distant from the kind of person who helps people up close." He didn't look at her when he said it. He kept working, his fingers slow, focused. He watched him closely. "You'd have been a good one," she whispered. He paused. "Mohidote, too scared, too angry. About your brother." He met her gaze for just a second. "Yeah." No walls, no mask. Just grief wearing the face of a man who forgot how to breathe unless he was fixing something. Later, after the others had gone to bed and the porch light flickered out, she stayed on the couch, with her foot elevated. He came back from the kitchen with a glass of water and sat on the floor beside her. Not the chair. Not another ruin. Right there, cross-legged, quiet. He took the glass, their fingers brushed. "Do you ever feel like your life is a long string of wrong doors?" she asked softly. He didn't respond right away. Then, yeah, until someone accidentally kicked one open with a backpack. He smiled despite himself. "Maybe I broke the right one open." "Maybe you did," he said. "And maybe you didn't break it at all. Maybe you just reminded me there's still something behind it." They sat in silence again. The kind of silence that only exists between two people who have run out of reasons to pretend they're not lonely. He spoke first. "If I hadn't mistaken you for a criminal, where do you think you'd be right now?" He thought for a long time. "The plane," he said, "to a conference I didn't want to go to, for people I don't like, talking about money I don't need." She tilted her head. "And now?" He looked at her, his voice soft. "Here, on the floor, with a girl who thinks I'm still slightly untrustworthy but not completely hopeless." She laughed, and something in him softened. Not because she laughed, but the next morning when she limped into the kitchen with a crutch someone had dug up from the clinic supply closet, the entire breakfast table applauded. He rolled his eyes and sat down across from Dylan, who pushed a mug of coffee toward her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The steam rising between them said, enough. That afternoon, she didn't go with Celia to the field. She stayed inside and organized donations. A small, thankless job, one no one would notice. But when Dylan passed by the doorway and saw her labeling first aid kits and folding towels with surgical precision, he stopped. "You don't have to do that," he said. He lingered in the doorway. "I think that's why it matters." That night she couldn't sleep again. Not from pain, from feeling too much. The town was quiet, the walls even quieter. So she stepped outside barefoot, walking slowly to the edge of the porch. Dylan was already there. Same steps, same stars, different silence. This time she sat beside him without asking. He looked over. She nodded. I don't know why, just... He didn't say anything, but he reached over, slowly covered her hand with his. She let him, and for once in her life, she didn't feel like she needed to run. Chapter 4. Scapegoat. The celebration was small but noisy. Boxes had arrived, donations, fresh medical supplies, books for the new school, jars of peanut butter, crayons, things that didn't change the world but reminded people it could. Louisa was helping unload them from the flatbed truck, her ankles still tender but healing. She wore an oversized hoodie someone had given her, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back in a crooked knot. She hadn't laughed this much in months. He didn't notice Clara at first. The project coordinator was usually cheerful, even flirty when Dylan was around, but today she was tense. Her smile was stiff. She whispered with one of the staff, nodded toward Dylan, then glanced. Louisa felt it, the shift, like a temperature drop before a storm. "Mrs. Michelka," Clara said quietly, "can we speak for a moment, in private?" Dylan followed her toward the clinic, glancing back once. Louisa's stomach twisted. They returned 10 minutes later. Dylan looked. Louisa wiped her hands on her jeans and approached him. "You okay?" He nodded, then paused. "Can we talk? Alone?" They stepped behind the clinic, out of earshot. The sun was low. The smell of dried grass filled the space between them. "There's been an issue," Dylan began, his voice flat. "A few of the higher-value donations are missing. Medical kits, pain meds, some antibiotics." He stiffened. "What? Inventory says they never arrived, but Clara claims you were the one who received that box. Said you logged it." Louisa blinked. "I never signed anything." "She says you were the only one alone with the supplies." There was cold, cerebral. "You think I stole them?" Her voice rose slightly, sharp with disbelief. "And I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Dylan ran a hand through his hair. "Louisa, I'm just trying to understand what happened." Her chest burned. "You brought me here, you said I mattered, and the second something goes wrong, you look—" His eyes flashed. "It's not about trust." "Yes, it is," she snapped. "It's always about trust." He took a step back. The dirt crunched beneath her boot. "Once you met, I hit you with a backpack because I thought you were hurting someone, and you laughed. You forgave me. You called me brave." He didn't speak. "But now, you won't even defend me." "I just need to be sure," he said quietly. And with that, everything collapsed. And she packed quickly. He wanted to leave, because she couldn't stay where she wasn't believed. Seeley tried to stop her at the door. "You're not running, are you?" And Walkie. He whispered his anxiety. She ended up at a roadside inn 2 towns away. The mattress sagged, the AC unit buzzed like it was crying. He stared at the ceiling and tried to hate him. He couldn't. He hated how easily she believed in him. How good it had felt to be seen. Dylan didn't sleep either. Something didn't sit right. The numbers didn't add up. He dug into the logs, cross-checked signatures, checked the old security camera mounted on the back shed. And there, a grainy image, Clara herself unloading the missing boxes late at night. He'd pocketed the key. She'd signed Louisa's name. She'd rerouted the meds to another van. He felt sick. Too sick because he'd doubted Louisa. Because she had been the one person who didn't want anything from him, and he threw her away the second someone pointed a finger. He drove straight to her the next morning. He was at a diner picking at burnt toast. He sat across from her without order, though she didn't look up. "It accused me of stealing the sugar too?" He flinched. "I was wrong." He didn't speak. "It was Clara. I found the footage." "I should have trusted you," he said. "I failed you, and I'm sorry." She finally looked up. Her eyes were tired. "You didn't just doubt me, Dylan. You made me believe I belonged, and then pulled the floor out from under me." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm not asking to be your secretary again," she added. He shook his head. "I don't want you to be my secretary." "And what do you want?" He swallowed hard. "I want—" He stared at him for a long time. And then, slowly, the walls cracked. "Double pay," she whispered. He blinked. "If I come back, double pay, breakfast included." His smile started in his eyes. "You got it." He stood. "And if I feel like hitting you again?" "Only if it's with love," he said, standing beside her. Though she didn't laugh. Not right away. But she said. And that was enough. Chapter 5. The Man Who Didn't Chase Her. Did he call the next day? Or the one after? And Louisa told herself that was a good thing. That she didn't want an apology followed by pressure. That maybe silence, for once, was the most honest thing a man could offer her. Still, the phone stayed too close. The texts went unanswered. The ache in her chest? It wasn't heartbreak. Not really. It was disappointment. The old, familiar kind. Because Dylan Miller, the man who once said, "You're the first right thing in a long time," had believed a stranger over her. The diner was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Louisa sat at the last booth, picking at scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard. She was half thinking about asking for ketchup when the bell above the door jingled. She didn't need to look up. She felt it. His presence landed before his feet even crossed the floor. She didn't move, and he said, voice cautious. He flipped a page in the menu she'd already memorized. I'm not here to explain, he added, sliding into the booth across from her. I did that already. He didn't stop him. But I needed to say one more thing. Now she looked up. His face was tired, hair messy, shirt wrinkled. He hated how it made him look more real. I didn't chase you, he said, because I thought I didn't deserve to. He blinked. But I came back, because I realized this story doesn't get to end with my failure. He set her fork down. You still think this is a story? Her voice was quiet, with a nice arc and a redemptive ending. No, he admitted. I think it's life. And sometimes life doesn't hand out second chances. But sometimes, he reached into his pocket and laid it on the table. A folded hand-drawn map. We stared at it. It was a new project, he said. In the mountains. Remote, difficult. But it matters. She picked up the paper. And you want me there. Not as staff, not as backup, as my partner. She met his eyes. And what happens if I say no? He smiled, soft. Then I'll find another diner, another booth, another weak coffee to sip until you say yes. They left the diner together. No fanfare. No hand-holding. Just two people who had stopped pretending they didn't miss each other. The trip was long, through dirt roads, pine forests, and switchbacks that threatened the tires of Dylan's very unmountain-friendly rental car. He made fun of his playlist. He made fun of her snack choices. But in between the teasing there was something quiet building again. Not trust. Not yet. But presence. And that was its own kind of faith. The village was smaller than the first. No clinic, no school, no paved roads. Just a tight cluster of wooden homes, the sound of a distant waterfall, and faces that looked both curious and cautious. They stayed in a small cabin with 2 bedrooms and 1 flickering porch light. Louisa stood in the middle of the creaking floorboards and took a breath. This place smells like adventure. It smells like mildew, Dylan replied. Saved. That night, wrapped in mismatched blankets, they sat on the porch again. Like always. Like before. He looked at her and said, "Why do you say yes?" He didn't answer right away. Because I'm tired of running from things that might be good. He leaned back. Not perfect. I'm not asking for perfect. I just... I'd be worried if you did. He turned toward her. You still don't trust me, do you? He didn't flinch. No. He nodded. Then let me earn it. They didn't kiss that night. They got to otol to hold to. But the silence was warmer than anything she remembered. And the stars above the mountains didn't ask them to be anything more than what they were. 2 people who stayed. Chapter 6. Back where it began. The road looked the same. Same crooked sign at the fork. Same line of sycamores swaying like they knew something you didn't. Louisa leaned her head against the window, watching it all blur by. It hadn't been that long since she left. But it felt like another lifetime. A version of herself who still held her breath around hope. When they pulled into the village, no one said anything at first. Then the kids saw them. And the laughter started. Micah ran up first, barefoot, birch-streaked, carrying what looked like half a broken kite and a worm in a jar. You came back, he shouted. Louisa smiled. I always keep my promises. He frowned. No, you don't. You left. He crouched to his level. Only for a little while. I was testing your memory. He nodded solemnly. I remembered you. Good, she whispered, ruffling his hair. I remembered you too. Celia greeted her with a long hug and no questions. That was her way. No apologies, no commentary. Just a squeeze that said, you survived. I'm proud. He glanced at Dylan next, arms crossed. You still in one piece? She asked dryly. Very good. He handed him a folded note. Blueprint updates. And a fresh pie in the kitchen. I assume one will help you more than the other. He read it. Both, actually. That night, they didn't sit on the porch. They sat on the clinic steps, unfinished, uneven but familiar. Louisa looked out over the field, her breath catching on memory. This is where you told me about your brother. Gillen nodded. And you didn't run. You almost did. He went too silent. Then, I wanted to build something here, she whispered. Not just buildings, something lasting. She turned to him. He reached over, touched her wrist gently. He said. The next few days moved slowly. Meetings with builders. Clinic walls being reinforced. Food deliveries. Local volunteers asking questions. Louisa started writing things down in a notebook again. Not just tasks. Feeling. Like how Dylan talked less but listened more. So he now paused before answering questions. How he asked her for input and actually used it. It made something ache inside her. The good the rebuilding kind. On the fourth morning she stepped outside before sunrise. The air was cold, the hills dusted with fog, chickens rustled nearby. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked barefoot to the far edge of the property, past the tree line. The spot where she'd first felt it. Not love. Not even belonging. But safe. That quiet hum inside her that whispered, maybe you don't have to fight everything anymore. Dylan found her there an hour later. He didn't speak at first. He just stood beside her, hands in his pockets. I brought coffee, he said, holding out a mug. He took it. Oh, bad? He asked. No. They both smiled. But he cleared his throat. There's something I want to show you. He led to behind the school where an old greenhouse frame had been left half-assembled. On the table was a folder. Sketches. Community center. Playground, clinic rooms, a tiny library. At the bottom of the project coordinator, Louisa Morris. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. You right? No, he said. We did. He stared at him. His expression was quiet, nervous, hopeful. I want you to run it with me, he said. No titles, no backup, and real risk. Yeah. She was silent. Then she closed the folder and pressed it to her chest. I've never run anything in my life. You ran from me, he said, twice. She laughed. And I came back, she replied. They stood there for a long moment. Sunlight broke through the trees, casting long gold ribbons across the grass. Louisa turned to him. And if I say yes, what does that make me? Ellen smiled. The girl who stayed. Chapter 7. When the fever hit. The heat came slowly. First it was just one child, then 2 more, then 4. By the time the 5th child showed sign, high fever, shallow breathing, the laughter had vanished from the village. And the fear arrived. The clinic wasn't ready, not really. It had walls and floors but no doctor, no refrigeration unit, no consistent supply line. Louisa didn't sleep the first night. He sat on a folding chair by the clinic bed, wiping down foreheads with a damp cloth, her eyes darting from thermometer to stopwatch. He kept a notebook open beside her, logging everything. Symptoms, onset time, pulse rates, breath counts. Every hour she flipped back to check her math. Every hour she told herself, we're okay. Every hour she believed it less. Dylan worked in parallel. He was on the satellite phone all day and night, calling their headquarters, calling volunteers, calling the closest town with a working generator and a freezer that could hold antibiotics. He didn't eat. And when the network went down on the 3rd night, he punched the wall hard enough to break skin. Louisa found him outside, his hand bleeding. He didn't say anything at first. Just took his wrist gently, led him to the porch, unwrapped it with gauze from the emergency kit. "You okay?" she asked. He stared straight ahead. "I built this place to make up for what happened to my brother," he said quietly. "And now I'm watching it happen again." He tied the bandage firmly. "Then let's stop it before it does." They slept in shifts after that. Dylan the cot beside the entrance. Louis sat on a pile of blankets near the kids. At 3:00 I eat on the fourth night. She sat up suddenly, hand over her heart. A child had started coughing. He rushed over, adjusted his blankets, took his temperature again. It's still too high. Her breath came faster. She didn't realize she was crying until Dylan sat beside her, hand gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "You're not alone," he whispered. And for once she didn't push him away. By dawn, help arrived. A van, 2 volunteer nurses, medical-grade supplies, antibiotics chilled in an old Coca-Cola cooler. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The fevers began to fall. One by one the children opened their eyes again. Oscar was the first to smile. And just like that, the worst had passed. That night, after the kids had been tucked in and the clinic finally grew quiet, Dylan found Louisa on the back steps. She was holding the same mug from a week ago, now chipped and half to of tea. Her hands were shaking. He sat beside her. "I thought I couldn't do it," she whispered. "We did. He was so scared. He was sorry." She turned to him. "And what if we fail again?" "And then we fail," he said. "Together." He stared at him, then reached for his hand. He didn't run this time. He looked down at their fingers intertwined, because he finally found something worth staying for. The kiss happened softly, without build-up, without drama. Just 2 people with trembling hands and tired eyes, leaning into the only steady thing left between them, each other. Later he whispered into her hair, "It's not just the world that needs you, Lucia. I need you too." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Chapter 8. The Storm on page 1. It started like most storms do. Quiet. A single vibration on Louisa's phone in the middle of the night. A message from Angela. The wake was back at the diner. He turned on the news. It's about Dylan. Louisa rubbed her eyes, padded barefoot to the clinic's break room, and opened the only working laptop. The Wi-Fi was weak. The article took too long to load. But once it did, the headline hit like a punch. CEO Dylan Miller accused of cover-up in the failed rural clinic. Her heart dropped. She couldn't. The story outlined a project 5 years ago, a medical center funded by Miller Enterprises, a faulty build, a malfunctioning freezer. A child had died. He claimed internal documents showed Dylan had been made aware. Orpul dono dominante. There were screenshots, email, photo. He stared at the screen until the light made his eyes burn. He was already gone by the time she found his note. On the kitchen table of the shared cabin. In his handwriting. "Louisa, when I met you I thought you'd be the most unpredictable part of my life. Turns out you're the only steady part. I need to step away, not out of fear, but because this isn't about me, it's about the projects that still matter. If I stay, the media turns this into a circus. But if I disappear, maybe they'll focus on what matters. If you're still here when I come, he'll tell you everything." And he read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't just the leaving that hurt. It was that he hadn't looked her in the eyes when he did. The village buzzed with uncertainty. Workers whispered, volunteers speculated, donors pulled back. The world, once wide and green, felt suddenly brittle. But Louisa didn't. He worked, and she showed up. He stood in the clinic doorway with a clipboard in one hand and 1,000 unspoken questions in the other. But she stayed. Still, she needed answers. Benjamin Miller was Dylan's grandfather. Louisa had met him once briefly. Sharp suit, sharp tongue, eyes like he could see through you. She drove to his estate in Boulder 3 days later. When he opened the door, he said nothing. Just stuck aside and motioned toward the garden. They sat under a pergola tangled with jasmine, in silence. He poured tea without asking. He spoke first. I read the articles. I expected you would. Did he lie? Benjamin sipped, then set his cup down with the kind of precision men like him were born into. Dylan was 24. An intern. He saw what was coming and tried to stop it. The board silenced him. His father threatened to pull his name off the family trust if he spoke again. Louisa's throat tightened. Why didn't he say that? Because he carries guilt like oxygen. He left without asking where Dylan had gone. Benjamin hadn't told her. But she knew. Somewhere quiet, remote, familiar. Somewhere that once broke him, and maybe could build him again. 2 days later she drove the mountain road back to the first village. The one where it had all started. The one with the half-built school, and the porch where he once sat shaking in the dark. And there he, sitting alone on the school steps, hair messy, beard rough, face cracked open in a way she hadn't. He stood slowly as she approached. But Elisido moved toward. He stopped a few feet away. It's the where you go when the world falls apart. His voice was quiet. It's where I remember who I want to be. She looked at him. Hard. You should have told me. I was afraid. Of what? That I'd lose the only person who didn't see me as a headline. He stepped forward. You don't lose the people who choose you. He met her eyes then. We met that. And in that moment she saw it. Not power, not legacy, but a man barefoot on the edge of his own ruin, who still wanted to fight. Not for reputation. For her. He held out his hand. Can you forgive me? She took it. Only if you promise that next time you run. With me. He smiled. Exactly. And with that they walked back toward the house. Together. Not perfect. But present. And sometimes that was all it took. Chapter 9. The answer was always her. When Dylan returned to Denver, the lobby of Miller Enterprises looked different. It because the building had changed. But because he had. No suit. No security entourage. Just him, in sneakers and a worn-out sweater, with a woman by his side who had once mistaken him for a thief. Louisa stood at his left holding a folder. Not behind him. Not 3 steps back. Beside him. The boardroom doors opened and half a dozen executives turned to look. Dylan didn't flinch. He placed a single page on the table. It was where we go next. The proposal shocked it. Community-first development models, equity-based education funding. A nationwide health access fund that stripped the corporate veneer and put people at the center. There was resistance. As expected. But it didn't last. Because when Dylan stopped speaking, Louisa stood up, and her voice, clear, steady, unfamiliar even to her own ears, cut through the room like wind through glass. A goal isn't to build buildings, she said. It's to build belonging. Places where people don't just survive, but feel seen. No one spoke for a long time. Then an older man with wire-rimmed glasses leaned forward and said, This is more than strategy. It's purpose. Outside, Louisa leaned against the building and exhaled. Her hands were shaking. It was terrifying, she whispered. Dylan handed her a coffee. You crushed it. I said belonging. She took a sip and shook her head. You know what scares me more than public speaking? It was Dylan Digma. He stepped closer. I know you. And I'd rather be scared with you than safe with anyone else. Later that week he took her back to the same village. The school was nearly finished, the medical wing operational. Louisa stood on the porch steps as the sun sank low. I don't recognize myself anymore, she said. Dylan leaned against the post beside her. He looked at him. You really think so? He turned fully. I think the girl who thought she was just surviving is finally living." She looked away, eyes bright. He didn't press. He just slipped a ring box into her palm. "Before you say anything, it's not what you think." She opened it. Inside was a small carved wooden ring, no diamond, just a single engraving of a flower. The one they'd found together in the field. Louisa stared down. "I wanted to make a big gesture," Dylan said, "but then I remembered. Our story didn't start with anything perfect. It started with a mistake, a misunderstanding, a swing of a backpack." She laughed, tears already welling. He stepped closer. "So I'm not asking for the rest of your life. I'm asking for every ordinary day we can build together. Brick by brick, messy and real." Louisa swallowed hard. "You're not easy. I know. You talk too much. Rebecca, you once doubted me when I needed you most. I've been trying to earn your trust every day since." She looked at him long. Then slowly, carefully, she slipped the ring onto her finger. "Okay," she said softly. He blinked. "Okay." He smiled. "Let's build it." Chapter 10. Reinforced bricks. Well, they didn't throw a wedding. They built one. Together. It wasn't grand or published or worthy of a magazine spread. No silver-plated anything. No matching napkins. But there were yellow paper flowers, hand-drawn signs from village kids, a playlist Dylan put together on a cracked iPhone, and a single string of lights that flickered above the steps of the now-finished school. Louisa wore white, barefoot, hair in a braid. Dylan wore navy. It's still barefoot. It's still awkward. Their vows weren't scripted. They weren't memorized. They weren't even spoken into a microphone. Just quiet promises exchanged under an open sky, with a few dozen people bearing. "You once told me I was the first right thing in a long time," Louisa whispered. "But the truth is, you were the first thing I chose, after I stopped being afraid." Dylan's voice cracked when he replied. "I thought I needed to build places to make up for the past, but what I really needed was a person who wouldn't let me hide behind it." They kissed as the sun dipped behind the hills. And no one clapped. They didn't need to. Some moments are too sacred for applause. The days that followed weren't perfect. They were real. Morning coffee that tasted too bitter. Arguments about budgets. Late nights reviewing clinic paperwork. Early mornings feeding kids who weren't biologically theirs, but felt like extensions of something they were building from the ground up. Louisa no longer wrote in a journal out of loneliness. Now she scribbled plans on napkins, lists on her arm, ideas on the back of Dylan's old project folders. "You never stop," he said one evening, watching her sketch a layout for a second library room. "I'm just getting started," she replied. It happened on a quiet Sunday. He found himself staring at 2 lines on a test that shook her entire world. He waited until dusk to tell him. He was fixing a solar lamp on the porch, mumbling about wiring and the injustice of battery life. She stepped out, holding the test in one hand and a glass of water in the other. He said softly. He turned. He saw her face. And froze. He didn't speak. And she didn't have to. He set down the screwdriver, crossed the porch, and pulled her into the gentlest, most unfiltered embrace she'd ever felt. His voice was thick. "I didn't think my heart could hold more than this." "But it will," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, "it will." 9 months later, their daughter was born in the same village where they first built something that mattered. They named her Clara. After clarity. After curry. They found everything they found in the silence between heartbreak and healing. Years passed. The projects grew. So did the laughter. And the legacy. But they never forgot the beginning. Not the airport. Not the mistook. Not the moment her backpack connected with his shoulder and the world spun on a dime. Louisa once thought that swing had broken something. But it hadn't. It cracked the walls they were both hiding behind. So they could step into something honest. something whole, worth building. Brick by brick. Some people say love arrives like thunder. Loud, obvious, unmistakable. But sometimes it comes in quieter ways. In mistake. In your move on. A swing of a backpack that rewrites two lives before either one realizes what's happening. Villain Milla never meant to fall for a girl like Louisa Morris. And she never meant to trust a man who looked like every promise she'd stopped believing in. But life doesn't ask what we're ready for. It simply hands us the truth and waits to see what we'll do with it. Louisa thought survival was her story. Getting by, holding steady, keeping her head down. But then came the moment when someone looked at her not as a burden or a risk, but as a partner, as the answer, not the mistake. And it thought legacy came from control, from fixing things, from being better than the people who came before him. But in Louisa he found something different. A love didn't ask him to be perfect. Just present. They built clinics. They built schools. They built trust. And in time they built a home that didn't have walls. It had world. It had quiet mornings and messy afternoons, and the kind of evenings where no one has to ask if they're loved. They just know. Because love, the real kind, isn't loud. It's steady. It stays. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. Love doesn't always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it comes disguised as chaos, as confusion, as a moment you wish you could take back. Until you realize you don't want to, because that was the moment everything began. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever swung first without knowing what you were defending, if you've ever been doubted, it stayed soft, if you've ever believed that maybe, just maybe, love could find you where you are, tell her Mike, the one that changed everything, will be reading, will be him. Because some stories, like some people, deserve to be seen. Thank you for staying to the very end. We built this with you in mind.